Every mirror was covered, except the one that showed a murder. Welcome to Agent Ash. I am your host, Hallow. Drop a comment and share where you're watching from. I love seeing your replies. You make this mystery community feel like home. Let's get started. It began with a sound no one could agree on. Some said it was a gunshot. Others swore it was the shriek of the wind that never quite left Marston House, even on a still summer night. But everyone heard something, a crack, a shatter, a scream, echoing off the panelled walls just past midnight, when most of the house was supposed to be asleep. What they found was this. A long mirror in the eastern drawing room had split straight down the centre, jagged like a bolt of lightning, as though something had struck from inside the reflection. And in front of it, knees folded underneath her like a collapsed marionette, lay Lady Portia Marston, eyes open, mouth slightly parted, a single smear of blood darkening the cream collar of her nightgown. No weapon was found, no sign of struggle. The French doors leading to the terrace were locked from the inside. The mirror, old and foxed with age, stood like a broken witness. Marston House, long the subject of hushed tales in Wiltshire society, had not seen such scandal since the war. Built in the Georgian style, but burdened with Victorian embellishments, a folly of an atrium here, a hallway to nowhere there. The house sat on a rise, isolated by design, and now, in its echoing halls, gathered the people who had not yet left for London. There was Sir Alaric Marston, the widower, 63 years of age, whose expression had not changed since his valet found the body. Tall, trim, with a neatly combed white moustache that looked like it had been ironed into place. His wife's death had frozen him into a politeness that struck many as almost offensive. Miss Ione Temple, the niece, sharp-chinned, sharper-tongued, too clever for her surroundings. She had been the first to speak the word murder aloud. She had also been the one to insist that Scotland Yard should not be called. Not yet. Then there was Felix Vale, the portrait artist from Hampstead, invited to paint Lady Portia's likeness before the upcoming anniversary gala. He had arrived with a set of oils and a reputation for seducing his sitters. He was the only one who admitted to hearing a voice just before the crash, a voice that called someone's name, though he claimed not to remember which. Colonel Ewan Browning, retired and red-faced, had been playing billiards in the West Wing and heard nothing. He had a fondness for brandy and military metaphors and a deep disdain for artists, whom he referred to as lily-fingered. And finally, Marjorie Pym, companion, housekeeper, and perhaps the most loyal person in the house. She claimed she had been asleep, but her slippers were damp with dew. Inspector Green from the local constabulary arrived just before dawn and found too little and too much. No fingerprints, no motive, no unlocked doors, but too many stories, too many glances exchanged, and far too much talk of reflections. "It's suicide," said Sir Alaric, after a long silence. "Not likely," said Ione, "unless she stabbed herself with air." "It was the house," whispered Marjorie. "She said the mirrors frightened her." Colonel Browning scoffed audibly. Women and their nerves. By midday, Green had called in reinforcements, or rather, one reinforcement. Hercule Poirot arrived with the sun still catching on the morning mist, casting twin shadows across the long gravel drive. He stepped out of the black car with infinite care, adjusting his cuffs as though entering a ballroom rather than a crime scene. Beside him, the constable muttered something about foreigners and fuss. Poirot took in the facade of the house with a faint grimace. "A pretentious symmetry," he murmured. "Et pourtant, quelque chose de faux, something false beneath the order." He was shown at once to the drawing-room. He studied the broken mirror for a long time. His eyes moved slowly, not scanning, never darting, observing, absorbing, as if he were listening to the room breathe. There was once a superstition, he said to no one in particular, that a mirror broken at night meant the soul had left the body. Poirot crouched delicately, examined the rug, the bloodstain, the scattered pearls from Lady Portia's necklace. He picked up one, just one, and turned it over in his fingers. No struggle, no sign of forced entry, and yet a death, not of drama, of silence. He straightened, adjusted his boutonniere, and turned to Inspector Green. "Monsieur, may I have the liberty of speaking to each guest in turn, and if possible alone, without mirrors present?" Green blinked. "You think they're dangerous?" "No," Poirot said softly, "merely untrustworthy." The room fell into a hush, disturbed only by the distant tick of a grandfather clock, as if the house itself was holding its breath. Outside, the wind began to pick up, catching at the cracked pane of glass in the broken drawing-room mirror. The edge shimmered briefly, as though something behind it had flinched. Poirot requested the interviews take place, not in the grand drawing-room where the tragedy occurred, but in the sunlit conservatory overlooking the south lawn. He preferred, he explained, the presence of life, ferns, orchids, and creeping ivy, to the echoes of death still clinging to the panelled walls and broken glass of the other room. The housekeeper, Mrs. Elkins, laid out weak tea and dry biscuits, which Poirot ignored entirely. He sat with his gloves folded neatly on his knee, shoes precisely aligned on the tile floor, as though he were himself an exhibit of order within the chaotic gallery of Marston House. Miss Ione Temple was first. She arrived precisely on time, chin tilted, her cigarette already lit. She did not sit until invited, and even then perched rather than relaxed, coiled like a question mark. "My aunt was a woman of routines," she said, exhaling smoke upward. "Chamomile tea at 9, 2 pages of Keats before bed, 3 turns about the gallery, never 4. She disliked symmetry, said it tempted fate." Poirot inclined his head slightly. "And yet, mademoiselle, she dressed with exactitude, every button, every pearl." Ione narrowed her eyes. "Yes, she was fond of appearances. She once told me the mirror was not to reflect reality, but intention." Poirot let the silence settle. He tapped a finger on his knee once. "And your own intentions, Mademoiselle Temple? What brought you here to Marston House before the anniversary?" "My mother asked me to visit Sir Alaric, to smooth things." Her smile did not reach her eyes. "There's talk of rearrangements in the family trust. Portia was opposed. I was sent to apply—" "Polish." "Polish," Poirot repeated softly. "And did Lady Portia polish easily?" "Not remotely. She found me tiresome. I suspect the feeling was mutual." Ione dropped her cigarette into the teacup, where it hissed. She didn't like being reminded she had no children. "And you, mademoiselle?" Poirot asked. "Do you like being reminded you are not one of hers?" Ione blinked, just once. But Poirot caught the reaction, filed it, and stood. "Merci. That will be all for now." She left without looking back. Colonel Browning followed, breathing heavily, his walking stick clicking on the tile. "Ghastly business," he barked, before sitting. "Wouldn't have happened under proper discipline." Poirot nodded politely. "You heard nothing?" "Number damn house swallow sound. You know it was once used to hide recusant priests? Hollow walls everywhere?" Poirot smiled faintly. "And where were you precisely at the time of the incident?" "Billiards. Alone. No witnesses, I'm afraid, unless the whiskey decanter cares to testify." "You were not fond of Lady Portia?" The colonel shifted. "She was fine. Bit lofty. Didn't like my shooting trophies in the dining room. Called them grotesque victories. But she kept the place up. I'll grant her that." Poirot made a small note in his pocketbook. "And the artist, Monsieur Vale. Do you know him well?" "Vale?" Browning snorted. "Preens like a prize cockerel. Thinks every woman wants to be immortalized in oil. Wouldn't trust him with a butter knife, let alone a lady's virtue. Poirot allowed the man to grumble himself out of importance, then dismissed him gently. Colonel Browning saluted half ironically before departing. Next was Felix Vale. Tall, unshaven in an intentionally careless way, and smelling faintly of turpentine, he entered the conservatory with an air of disaffected reverence. She was a difficult subject, he said, before being asked. Lady Portia, beautiful in a cruel way, like a statue you might find in a ruined garden, elegant but weathered. She insisted I paint her not as she was, but as she remembered herself. Poirot steepled his fingers. You were working late? I was sketching preliminary angles. The drawing-room had the best light. I saw her enter. She didn't see me. She stood in front of the mirror. Just stood, not moving, as though waiting to hear something. Poirot raised a brow. And did she? Vale looked away. I think she said a name, but I couldn't quite hear it. Then the sound came, a crack. The mirror split, and she fell. There was no scream. You told Inspector Green that someone may have called out. I thought so at first, but maybe I imagined it. Echoes in a place like this. He trailed off, adjusting the cuffs of his paint-stained shirt. Or maybe it was her reflection. She didn't like to be watched. Poirot's gaze sharpened. What makes you say that? Vale hesitated. She once told me, I trust the reflection only when it's still, not when I move. That's when it begins to lie. Poirot did not comment. He simply noted that, and the smudge of dark blue paint on the cuff of Vale's shirt, the same shade as the crushed velvet curtains in the eastern drawing-room. He would confirm later if they had been touched. Marjorie Pym came in trembling. She looked older than her years, her hands permanently clasped like a prayer. I always turned down the bed at 10. Last night she asked me not to, said she'd be reading late. She wasn't herself, restless. She said the mirror had shifted. Poirot leaned forward. Shifted? Yes. She said it had moved. Not the frame, but the image. As though someone else had taken her place when she turned away. Poirot made no effort to hide his interest. And where were you, madame, when the sound came? In my room, I swear it. I had just washed my face. But I heard the wind, and then the noise. I ran, but I was not the first to arrive. Who was? I don't know. Perhaps Sir Alaric or Miss Temple. I saw no one in the hall, only the mirror. It looked like it had cracked inward. Poirot thanked her. Her voice had been steady, but her shoes, as he had noticed earlier, were damp and muddied. From the garden path, perhaps. A strange choice after midnight. When Sir Alaric finally arrived, it was with the calm of a man accustomed to silence. He sat, hands clasped in front of him, face unreadable. She was already gone when I arrived, he said. I called for Elkins, then Green. You did not move the body? No. Did you speak with her before she went to the drawing-room? No. Did you love your wife, Sir Alaric? He looked up, as though surprised by the question's lack of subtlety. Yes, he said, and the word rang strangely hollow in the conservatory's damp air. I admired her. She had a strength I lacked, and she loved this house more than she ever loved me. Poirot's gaze did not waver. And now the house is yours again. Sir Alaric did not reply. Poirot walked with Inspector Green to the drawing-room after the last interview. The room was unchanged, save for the slow gathering of dust where the shattered mirror still stood. Poirot examined the jagged crack, his fingers not touching the glass, but hovering a fraction of an inch away. The mirror, he said quietly, has seen too much. It tells a story, but not with words. He gestured to the baseboard beneath the frame. There is a mark here, a small one. Pressure applied. Recent Green frowned. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying, mon ami, that this mirror did not crack from within. It was struck. From the outside." With precision, Poirot straightened. His face remained composed, but his eyes had sharpened. "There is a lie, a small one, but perfectly polished, and somewhere in its reflection, the truth has already begun to fracture." He turned on his heel and walked back toward the hall. The wind rattled the cracked glass behind him. Somewhere above, a floorboard creaked, too soft to notice unless, like Poirot, one had learned to listen when others dismissed the sound. Someone had moved, not hours ago, just now, and that meant they were watching. Poirot paused at the foot of the staircase, his head tilted as though listening to something no one else could hear. The sound had been faint, just the whisper of a floorboard, but in a house like Marston, aged in secrets and silence, such a whisper could carry meaning. He did not call out. Instead, he turned back to Inspector Green, whose boots scuffed impatiently against the hallway tile. "We must be precise, mon ami," Poirot said softly. "The murderer is not far, and they are listening. That much I am sure of." Green looked skeptical. "You think someone's still hiding in the house?" Poirot gave a small smile. No, not hiding, observing. There is a difference. The guilty always return to the scene of the lie. It is not the body they revisit, it is the version of themselves they've tried to sell. He turned toward the library. "I should like to see Lady Portia's things, her correspondence, her writing desk." "She did not die from passion or impulse, Inspector. Number this crime was rehearsed. Emotionally, if not mechanically." Green gestured to the footman, who led them into the library, a long, dim chamber whose windows had not been fully unshuttered in days. The heavy scent of leather, beeswax, and some faint floral cologne hung in the air. Lady Portia's writing desk stood in the corner beneath a tall window, its surface immaculate. No scattered papers, no half-drained inkwells, merely a single pressed handkerchief and a small stack of letters, tied with a grey ribbon. Poirot, without sitting, leaned in and examined the desk drawer. It was locked. He straightened, beckoning to the housekeeper. "Madame Elkins," he said gently as she entered, "I require the key to this drawer." She hesitated, her eyes wide behind her spectacles. I believe Lady Portia kept it in her vanity upstairs, hidden under the mirror tray." Poirot's brow lifted ever so slightly. "Of course," he said. Even the key had a reflection. Upstairs, the bedroom had been undisturbed since the morning of the incident. Poirot entered with the reverence of a man walking into a painting. The room was soft with pastel silks, pale wisteria wallpaper, and the faintest trace of lavender water on the air. He moved slowly to the dressing table and, as expected, found the key beneath a mirrored tray lined with velvet. He did not touch the brush beside it, but noted with quiet interest that a single strand of grey-blonde hair had been twisted around its teeth, as if clutched rather than shed. Back in the library, he opened the desk drawer with care. There was little inside: 2 letters not yet posted, a worn leather-bound diary, and a folded newspaper clipping with faded edges. He opened the diary first. Lady Portia's script was tight, angular, and emotionally restrained. She wrote not to confess, but to catalogue. He read in silence, Inspector Green looking over his shoulder. August 3rd. Ione grows bolder. She asks questions without waiting for answers. There is ambition there, but also resentment. I do not trust her judgment. She sees through people too quickly, but never quite far enough. August 7th. Felix painted for 6 hours. He talks more than he works. He told me he paints women as they ought to have been remembered, not as they were. It frightened me, a little. August 9th. I heard the voice again. It said my name. I do not believe in ghosts, but mirrors are different. Mirrors do not lie, they wait. August 10th. Alaric was in the eastern drawing-room long after I retired. Said he was checking the window seals. He never cared for that room before. I believe he's hiding something, or perhaps watching something, or someone. Poirot set the diary down, fingers steepled beneath his chin. The pages crackled faintly in the stillness. "Inspector," he said, "Lady Portia was afraid. Not of death, I think, but of erasure. She feared being rewritten, replaced. That is the nature of the mind that lives in rooms of glass. It sees the threat not in confrontation, but in distortion." He turned to the folded clipping. It was from 5 years prior, a minor article in a local society page. The headline read, "Inheritance Challenge Dismissed. Marston Trust remains with Lady Portia." The article detailed how a distant cousin of Sir Alaric had attempted to sue for control of the estate's ancestral properties, citing irregularities in a post-war will. The case had been dismissed when Lady Portia produced a sealed letter and documentation from the family solicitor. The cousin, one Jasper, Marston, had not been heard from since. Poirot's mind turned quickly now. A sealed letter, a contested inheritance, a mirror struck from behind, a key hidden beneath another mirror. He rose with energy. "We must speak again with the niece, and soon. But first, this portrait. Vale's work. Has it been completed?" Green shook his head. He said he hadn't even started the oil canvas. Just sketches. "Where are they?" "Upstairs. His rooms." They climbed the narrow servants' stairs and reached the top corridor where the guest rooms overlooked the orchard. Poirot knocked lightly before entering Felix Vale's chamber. The artist was not inside. The room smelled of turpentine and rain-damp linen. A set of sketchbooks lay open on the desk near the window. Poirot flipped carefully through them. In one, there was a near-finished graphite sketch of Lady Portia. It captured her likeness with unnerving precision, down to the slight downturn at the corners of her mouth. But what Poirot lingered on was the mirror drawn behind her. It was the Eastern drawing-room, certainly. But in the sketch, her reflection did not match the pose of the woman seated. "She was turning slightly," Poirot murmured. Yet the reflection remained still. Another page. This time her eyes were closed, but in the reflection, wide open. Poirot turned, face grave. "Green," he said, "this man was not painting a woman. He was painting her undoing. He wanted her to see the self she feared most." As they exited the room, Poirot slowed his step. Something on the floor, just beneath the desk, a matchstick, not burnt, just snapped cleanly in two. A minor detail, unless one knew how precise Felix Vale was. His cuffs, his sketchbooks, his tones, they were all carefully measured. This break was either careless or deliberate. Back downstairs, Poirot requested one final thing before he would rest. "I must speak to Sir Alaric once more," he said, "privately, and then I shall ask that all the guests remain in the house. No one must leave. Not yet." Alaric arrived in the study as the evening sun dimmed the wallpaper to bronze. He did not sit. "She was keeping something," Poirot said. "The letters, the diary, the trust. And you, monsieur, you had ceased being her confidant long ago." Alaric looked away. "We were polite," he said at last, "and polite marriages end quietly. You see, no need for scandal, unless scandal knocks." Poirot paused. "There is someone in this house," he said slowly, "who knows what was hidden behind the mirror. Not just the reflection, but the truth Lady Portia feared. That someone has already lied to me once, perhaps twice, but no matter. They will lie once more, and that will be enough." He bowed slightly, and with that left Alaric alone in the fading light. Outside, the storm that had been building all afternoon finally broke. Rain tapped on the cracked glass of the eastern room. Poirot stood at the window and watched it fall, as if the house itself were beginning to remember. The rain deepened as night fell. It did not rage, but persisted, soft, steady, relentless. Marston House seemed to pull inward under the weight of it, its eaves dripping like slow tears, its long windows blurring into shadowed reflections. Poirot stood unmoving for some time, watching the water draw thin silver lines down the cracked mirror in the eastern room. It was a strange symmetry. Water outside, glass broken inside, and somewhere between them, the final thoughts of Lady Portia Marston still hanging in the air, like unshed words. He left the window and returned to the main corridor, where the guests had gathered for a tense, half-hearted supper. The dining room bore all the grace of pretense: heavy silver, silent servants, and a roast growing cold under its own grandeur. But no one was eating. Sir Alaric made a show of cutting into his portion. Colonel Browning swirled his wine without sipping. Marjorie Pym sat with her hands clenched beneath the table. Ione Temple spoke the most, but said nothing of value. And Felix Vale was notably absent. Poirot said nothing as he entered. His presence brought a hush, as it always did. He took his seat without remark, and unfolded his napkin with deliberate care. "I am told," he began, as if continuing a casual conversation, "that the Marston Trust is quite old. Ancient, almost, by English standards. Is that so?" Sir Alaric looked up, eyes dull. "Established in 1723. My great-great-grandfather secured the estate and several outlying properties under its protection." "And inheritance, of course," Poirot said, dabbing his lips though he had not yet eaten. "It becomes complex, non?" "It is what it is," Alaric replied, his voice flat. "Portia maintained control as primary trustee. I managed the legalities, but she had final say on most decisions. Even when others believed they had claim." Poirot's eyes flicked across the table. "Even, perhaps, when those others were present in this house under more than social pretense." Colonel Browning cleared his throat loudly. "If you mean Miss Temple, I hardly think it's appropriate—" "I don't," Poirot interrupted gently. "I speak not of Miss Temple. I speak of someone who wished to rewrite a lineage." Marjorie Pym gave a short gasp. Sir Alaric's knife clattered softly against his plate. Only Ione spoke. "You mean Jasper?" Poirot inclined his head. "He tried to sue after the war," she continued, her voice low. "Claimed the will had been manipulated, that Portia had misrepresented its contents to secure the trust for herself." Sir Alaric looked visibly irritated. "It was nonsense, dismissed in court." Poirot smiled faintly. "Legal nonsense, perhaps. But emotional claims, they do not vanish so easily. No, they remain, like dust on a mirror, unseen until light strikes at just the right angle." He stood, slowly. The dining room remained silent. "I believe I must speak with Mr. Vale again. I am told he is not in his room, nor at the supper table. And yet—" He did not finish the thought, but turned and left the dining room as smoothly as he had entered. He found Vale not upstairs, but on the covered terrace outside the drawing-room. The rain sheeted down beyond the stone archways, but he stood just beneath the eave, smoking a cigarette with slow, deliberate drags. His shirt was open at the collar. His jacket was missing. Poirot approached without haste. He stood beside the artist, watching the garden blur behind the veil of rain. "Why did you sketch the mirror differently, monsieur?" he asked. Vale did not flinch. "Because it didn't reflect her, not really." "Explain." "She wanted to see herself as she had been. But when she looked, she saw something else. Not age, not death, just absence. She once said, 'The reflection knows what I lost before I do.'" He crushed the cigarette beneath his heel. "I think it frightened her, and I think it fascinated her too." Poirot's voice was very quiet. "Were you in love with her?" Vale gave a dry laugh. "Don't flatter me, monsieur. Portia didn't love. She allowed. She admired. She endured. She commissioned me, not for flattery, but for permanence. She thought the portrait might trap something, hold it in place. She never said as much, but I felt it. You said she was already standing before the mirror when she died. Yes. And you heard her say a name? Vale hesitated, then nodded. Did you remember it? There was a long pause before the answer came. Jasper, he said. Poirot said nothing. The rain answered for him. When he returned to the house, the corridor was darker than before, as though the very walls sensed what was coming. Poirot made his way back to the library. He asked for Inspector Green to be summoned discreetly. The constable arrived within minutes. I need the case files on Jasper Marston, Poirot said. All legal documents relating to the inheritance dispute. And I need them now. Green blinked. That was years ago. But not over. Not truly. Find me the solicitor's name. And if Jasper is dead, I want proof. If he is alive, I want his whereabouts. One or the other. No more shadows. Green left, grumbling, but with purpose. Poirot remained in the library, eyes on the letter from the dismissed lawsuit. Jasper Marston. It fit. A man erased by the courts. A man who had once believed he was entitled to this house, to this name. He had lost. But people like that did not forgive. They watched. They waited. And sometimes they returned, changed. Poirot closed the drawer gently. His mind was already working ahead. If Jasper had come back, it would not be under his own name. He would not be welcomed, but he might be disguised, distant, smiling, like an artist, perhaps. Poirot exhaled softly. The sound was more a thought than breath. The mirror had not cracked by accident, nor from within. It had been struck, not with brute force, but with surgical precision. A mirror's weakness is not its surface, but the tension in its backing. A firm strike at the base, just beneath the pane, could split it top to bottom, cleanly, silently, especially if timed to coincide with a sound, a voice, a step, or a call. Jasper Marston would know the house well, the secret passages, the acoustics, and Felix Vale had sketched the mirror too well, a false reflection, a reversed angle, eyes that did not match their subject. Number not a mistake, a message. Poirot moved quickly then, not to confront, but to confirm. He returned to Vale's room. The sketches were still there, but in the bottom drawer of the dresser he found a small leather wallet. Inside there was no money, but there was a folded train ticket, issued under the name F. Jasper Vale. Poirot's fingers closed around it. Downstairs, the grandfather clock struck once, then once more. It was 11. In an hour, he would gather them all, and this time not for questions, but for truth. By the time midnight approached, the house had grown unnaturally still. The rain had thinned to a whisper against the glass, and in the grand hall where portraits of forgotten Marstons hung in solemn oil and dust, Poirot stood facing the hearth with his back to the gathering room behind him. The fire had long since died. Only the faint glow of a single lamp cast tremulous shadows along the carved mouldings, as if even the walls had begun to anticipate what was coming. He had requested, not asked, that everyone assemble. Sir Alaric arrived first, stiff and pale, followed by Miss Ione Temple, who wore her distaste like a second skin. Colonel Browning grumbled about the hour, but came anyway, his cane echoing on the marble floor. Marjorie Pym trailed behind, lips pressed tight, eyes darting nervously. And finally, Felix Vale. Jasper, Poirot reminded himself now, entered without hesitation, the perfect image of composure. The artist's jacket was back on, his hair slicked neatly as it had been the day he arrived. Poirot turned to them. Merci, mes amis, for gathering at such a regrettable hour. I assure you, the hour is no less inconvenient for me. But the truth, la vérité, she does not abide by clocks. He moved to the center of the room, his fingers lightly touching the edge of a small side table, where he had laid a few objects. A folded newspaper clipping, the diary, a sketchbook. You all know why we are here. The death of Lady Portia Marston. A tragedy, to be sure, but not a mystery, not any more. He let that linger as the silence thickened. Poirot looked directly at Felix. There was no weapon, no sign of forced entry, no struggle. And yet, she died. We assumed, perhaps you hoped, we would think it natural, or accidental, or perhaps unprovable. But the details, they always betray, especially the details we think too small to notice. Felix blinked once but did not speak. Poirot turned to the others. You see, mesdames et messieurs, this was not a murder of passion, nor of impulse. It was rehearsed, thought through, a performance with light and glass and silence, but even the most elegant illusions cannot withstand one thing: logic. He took the diary, opening it to a marked page. Lady Portia wrote, just days before her death, that someone had been in the eastern drawing-room late at night. She noted that her reflection no longer felt her own, that she feared being rewritten, that the mirror was shifting. Poirot looked up. You all dismissed it as the anxieties of age. But she was not mad. She was being watched. Her image was being studied, recreated. He opened the sketchbook to the portrait. You see this drawing? The angle of her shoulders, the tilt of her head, the mirror behind her. In the reflection, her posture does not match. Her eyes are closed in life but open in glass. That, mes amis, is not artistic license. That is intention. He walked now slowly to the hearth. You may wonder, how could a man kill without touching, without force? But you forget. The mirror. It did not shatter from within. It was struck at its weakest point, behind the frame. A deliberate blow, a precise one only someone familiar with the construction of the house could deliver. His voice softened. And who better than someone born of this house? Someone denied what he believed to be his inheritance. A man erased, legally, yes, but not in his own eyes. A man who returned, not as himself, but behind another name. He lifted the train ticket from the table. Felix Jasper Vale. A clever combination. A name half remembered, half invented. But you are not Felix Vale, are you? You are Jasper Marston. You came to reclaim what you believed was stolen from you. And when you realized Lady Portia would never allow it, you chose to remove her. Felix did not move. His face was utterly still. It was Ione who whispered first. Jasper. Colonel Browning stood, rising halfway before Poirot gestured him down. She would not see you, Poirot continued. She would not speak of you. You knew that, so you returned as someone else, an artist, commissioned, invited, welcomed. You watched her. You learned her movements, her fears, and you used them. Poirot lifted the diary again. She wrote that she heard her name spoken, but not to her face. It came from behind. A whisper timed perfectly to coincide with a small, quiet blow, one that split the mirror like a wound. The noise distracted her. Her heart, already strained perhaps, was startled. And you counted on that. You didn't need blood. You needed only for her to fall. Finally, Felix spoke. You have no proof, he said, voice level. I have enough, Poirot replied. The name, the forged documents, the sketches that betray foreknowledge of the room, the diary that details a man who matches your habits, your movements, the ticket stub you forgot in your drawer. But more than that, monsieur, your silence, the way you have waited, watched, and said too little. You played a long game, but even the longest game ends. Felix looked at Sir Alaric, then back at Poirot. She destroyed everything, he said softly. My claim, my family's history. She had no right. Poirot's voice turned cool. She had the law, and you had resentment. But you did not confront her like a man. You performed. You played the ghost in the mirror. Felix's hands twitched just slightly. She saw me, didn't she? He murmured. She knew. even in the end. Yes, Poirot said quietly. She knew. That is why she stood there. That is why she said your name. A long silence followed. Inspector Green entered then, quietly, having heard enough. Poirot gave him a slight nod. Felix did not resist when they took him. His jacket remained immaculate. He offered no final statement, no confession, only a faint, unreadable smile. When the room emptied, Poirot remained by the hearth, gazing into the cold grate. Ione lingered a moment. You always knew? Non, Poirot said gently. I knew only that something was false, and when one knows that, mademoiselle, one must listen, not to the noise, but to the silences, the details that do not shout, but whisper. She nodded once and left him. Poirot straightened his cuffs, glanced toward the mirror's empty frame, and spoke to no one. People lie, he said, but reflections, they reveal. And with that, he turned and left the house. Poirot did not sleep that night. He never intended to. Though the case had reached its apparent resolution, the sense of finality had not yet settled within him, not in the quiet way it always did when justice had truly been achieved. There was something brittle still in the air of Marston House, like frost clinging too long to spring leaves. The arrest of Jasper, Felix, had brought silence, but not peace. Poirot knew the difference. The others had dispersed in uneasy relief, each one retreating into the semblance of private safety. Colonel Browning had taken a double brandy to bed, grumbling about inheritance fraud and damnable pretenders. Ione Temple had retired with no questions, no remarks, merely a cool glance at Poirot as she passed. Sir Alaric, exhausted beyond anger, had locked himself in the study, with the door closed and the key turned from the inside. Only Marjorie Pym remained briefly in the hall, wringing her hands before finally whispering a thank you that sounded more like an apology. Poirot stood in the eastern drawing-room again, alone with the fractured mirror. The rain had stopped, and the moon pressed through the tall windows in pale smears. The broken glass gleamed faintly. It no longer reflected his form cleanly, only fragments, a shoe, a hand, the corner of his moustache. It looked in some way like memory. He touched the frame gently. Jasper had returned to claim a name. But Poirot wondered still if it had truly been Jasper's plan all along. The steps were too careful, the persona too convincingly crafted. But something still resisted alignment. Lady Portia's fear, her notes in the diary, the calculated eeriness of those mirrored sketches, all bore a singular paranoia that hadn't entirely matched the man now sitting in a jail cell. Poirot had looked into his eyes and seen something resentful, yes, but not obsessive. There was a difference. He left the drawing-room with sudden decision and moved swiftly back toward the guest chambers. He no longer knocked. He entered Ione Temple's room as the candle on her nightstand guttered low. She sat at the vanity in a silk robe, brushing her hair without surprise. She met his eyes in the mirror, not turning. "I thought you'd come," she said softly. "Ah," Poirot murmured. "Then you expected the truth would have weight beyond the arrest?" She placed the brush down carefully. "I expected that someone like you would not stop merely because a man was led away in handcuffs." He came closer, but not too close. The air in the room was still. "I must ask, Mademoiselle Temple, how well did you know Jasper Marston?" She turned at last, studying him. "We exchanged letters, years ago, before the trial, before the dismissal. My mother discouraged it, of course, but I was curious. He was strange, intense, but very intelligent, and bitter. He blamed Portia for everything." Poirot gave a small nod. "Did you ever meet him in person?" "Number not, until now." "But you recognized him," Poirot said gently, "when he arrived as Felix Vale." A pause. "Yes." Poirot's expression did not change. "And you said nothing?" Ione's eyes flashed, not with guilt, but with something colder. She destroyed him, she said, with a letter and a solicitor and a smile. She made him disappear, like people are made to disappear when they don't suit the shape of a family. Poirot's voice was mild. So you allowed him in? You invited him? I sent him the notice of the gala. I knew Portia would want a portrait. It was her vanity. You created the opportunity, Poirot said, but the plan to frighten her, to unnerve her, that came from him? She hesitated. Then, no, that was me. Poirot did not blink. He waited. She was afraid of mirrors, Ione said, her voice now without modulation, but not because of anything supernatural, because she couldn't bear to see herself without control. She hated being watched when she didn't know what others saw. She stood, pacing slowly. I gave Jasper, Felix, the idea. Sketch her reflection wrong. Let her notice. Then mention it again. Paint her like she wasn't anymore. She'd crack before the mirror did. Poirot's eyes narrowed. But you did not intend her to die. No, Ione said sharply. I wanted her unsettled, not dead. The mirror, he told me about that afterward. Said it just cracked. A mistake. She fell, that's all. Poirot stepped forward. But that is not all, mademoiselle. That is only the shadow. The substance is this. You chose to weaponize fear, not your own. Heron, you used the delicate string of her mind and stretched it until it broke. She was cruel, Ione hissed. Cold. You don't know what she did to my mother, how she treated me. She never lifted a hand, but she erased people with silence. That house, this house, was hers because she believed only she could shape it. The rest of us were ornaments, forgotten heirlooms. Do you know what she told me last spring? That I should marry money and preserve the bloodline, as if I were a dog in a breeding kennel. Poirot's expression remained unreadable. Even so, he said, you knew Jasper's resentment. You invited it into her life. You sat beside her at meals and said nothing, while the mirror behind her began to turn into a weapon. You are not a murderer, Mademoiselle Temple, but you lit the lantern, then left the door ajar for the wind. She said nothing. Did you plan what would happen after? Number Y I wanted her frightened, cornered, just once. She never looked anyone in the eye unless it was on her terms. I wanted her to see herself differently. But Jasper, he didn't warn me he was going to do anything. Poirot nodded. And yet, you said nothing after her death. I was afraid, she whispered, not of being caught, but of finding out I had made it happen. Poirot stood in stillness for a moment longer, then picked up the brush on the vanity and returned it to its tray. There are many crimes, he said softly. Some leave bodies, others leave echoes. You must decide which one you are prepared to live with. He left her alone in the mirror's gaze. Downstairs, Poirot returned once more to the study, where Sir Alaric still sat in the dark, eyes fixed on nothing. She knew, he said as Poirot entered. Portia. She knew Jasper had returned. She didn't tell me, but I saw it in the way she looked over her shoulder. Poirot seated himself without speaking. I failed her, Alaric said, in the quiet ways. I let her shoulder everything, this house, the family's image, the lawsuits. I told myself it was her strength, but it was her burden. Poirot waited. She used silence as a wall, but I let her build it alone. And now, it's all cracked open. Non, Poirot said gently. Not open, only honest. Mirrors, you see, reflect what is given to them. If they lie, it is because someone has taught them to. Alaric nodded once, slowly. Poirot rose to leave. The dawn was just beginning to pale the windows as he gathered his hat and coat. The eastern drawing-room, now empty of its watchers, glowed faintly in the first light. He passed by the broken mirror one last time, and in the shards he saw not his reflection, but every face from the house, fragmented and suspended, as though the truth had scattered them into pieces and left them there to choose whether to remain fractured or reassemble. Poirot walked out as the sun began to rise, his steps crisp against the flagstones, his mind already turning towards silence and the echo it always leaves behind. The light outside had shifted from silver to gold by the time Poirot reached the garden path, where wet gravel clung to his shoes and the scent of damp rosewood hovered just above the hedgerows. The air was cool, rinsed clean by the night's rain, and for a moment the grounds of Marston House looked like they had never held secrets, never played host to whispered names and shattered glass. But Poirot knew better. The house might fall still, the guests might retreat into orderly explanations, but guilt, real guilt, was a vine. It clung, it climbed, it rarely died where it began. He did not leave at once. Instead, he followed the path toward the orchard behind the east wing, where the trees were just beginning to stir with the promise of pears. Lady Portia had mentioned the orchard often in her diary, not with affection, but with duty. The trees had been her husband's concern, yet she had overseen their maintenance like everything else in the household, quietly, competently, with an eye trained always on how things might appear from the outside. He found Marjorie Pym there, alone. She wore her old gardening shawl over her shoulders, despite the warmth in the air. She was snipping dead leaves from the low box hedge, with a pair of shears that didn't quite cut any more, the blades squeaking on every close. Poirot approached softly. "You tend the garden this early every morning, madame?" She looked up, startled but not frightened. Her face was pale in the light, unpainted and unshielded. "Since Lady Portia passed, yes," she said. "I used to wait until after breakfast. But now—" She gestured weakly to the trees. "I find it easier when no one's about." He stood beside her without speaking. For a time, they merely watched the orchard breathe. "You were devoted to her," Poirot said gently, "even when she dismissed you, even when she forgot to thank you." Marjorie's fingers tightened around the shears. She didn't forget. She just expected people to already be what they ought. "And what were you expected to be?" "Grateful, invisible." Poirot nodded slowly. "You saw something that night," he said. "Something you haven't spoken of." She didn't deny it. She stopped clipping, lowered the shears, and looked at him fully. "I couldn't be sure," she said. "Not then. Not even now. I thought I heard a second voice, after the mirror cracked, just before Felix, Jasper, called for help." "Whose voice?" She hesitated. "Ione's," she whispered. "Just one word." "Enough. That's all she said. But it wasn't fear. It was resignation, as if something had gone further than planned." Poirot watched her face carefully. "And why did you not tell this to Inspector Green?" "Because by then they were saying it was Jasper, that he acted alone, and I wanted to believe it. It was easier that way, cleaner." Poirot looked toward the house. "Few things are ever clean, madame, especially in a house built on silence." She closed her eyes briefly, then opened them. "Will she be arrested?" "I do not think so. Her guilt is real, but not criminal. Not by law, but it will follow her as it must. She has looked in the mirror now. That changes people." Marjorie nodded once, and returned to her trimming. Poirot retraced his steps through the side garden, and entered the house again through the library door. It was here, he knew, that the weight of the past still settled most densely. Sir Alaric had left the decanter uncorked on the sideboard, a glass only half finished beside it. Poirot didn't touch it. He sat instead at the desk Lady Portia had used, running his fingers once more over the diary's edges. There were entries he hadn't read aloud, passages not directly relevant to the inquiry, but revealing nonetheless. May 11th. Ione carries herself like a woman who knows she's already been passed over for something. I wonder if that is why she sharpens herself, why she pierces instead of pleads. If I were younger, I might admire it. But now, I only fear she has learned too much from me." He closed the book. Poirot remained there until the grandfather clock chimed 9. The morning staff had begun to stir, breakfast trays clinking distantly. Soon, life at Marston House would resume its performance. But Poirot had one last role to play. He met Inspector Green at the front vestibule, where the car idled in wait. "You've made your report?" Poirot asked. Green nodded. "We've contacted the solicitor's office again. Confirmed Jasper's attempt to contest the trust. False identity, fraudulent documents, intentional misrepresentation. He'll be tried." "And the niece?" Green frowned. "Your word's enough to place her under suspicion, but she hasn't committed a punishable crime. Not one the law can reach." Poirot nodded slowly. "Mais bien sûr. It is not the law I serve, Inspector. It is truth." Green studied him for a moment, then looked away. As Poirot turned to leave, the butler arrived with a sealed envelope. "This arrived late last night," he said. "No name, but addressed to you, monsieur." Poirot took it, opened it carefully. Inside was a short note, written in an elegant, sharp hand. "You were right. Not about everything, but about enough. I never meant for her to die. I only wanted her to understand what it's like to lose your shape in someone else's house. Now I must live here, in the one I've made for myself." It was unsigned, but the scent. On the paper, jasmine, barely there, belonged to no one else in the house. Poirot folded the note and placed it in his breast pocket. As he stepped outside into the clear morning, he paused once on the top step and looked back at Marston House. It had not changed, but it had been revealed. Behind the ivy, the mirrors, the lace and polite silences, it was still the same great English house, but now it had bled, and houses, like people, remember the feeling. Poirot descended the steps and entered the waiting car, his thoughts already shifting toward other silences, other echoes, other rooms waiting for the breath of truth. And behind him, somewhere deep within the bones of Marston House, a broken mirror remained, still cracked, still reflecting, still watching. The road away from Marston House curved gently through the Wiltshire countryside, past hedgerows still trembling from the previous night's storm, and small farms resuming their quiet rituals under the grey-blue morning. Poirot sat in the back seat of the car, not reading, not taking notes, but thinking. Not with intensity, but with precision. Each thought lined up, weighted, turned over in the quiet compartments of his mind until its truth or its falsehood revealed itself. He held the unsigned letter in his gloved hand, turning it over once more. It was brief, measured, but not indifferent. The writer had not sought absolution, nor had she protested innocence. It was something more dangerous, acceptance without remorse, a declaration of quiet war made after the smoke had cleared. That kind of admission always carried a risk, because it meant the speaker would do it again if the conditions repeated. Some people used guilt as a warning, others used it as fuel. The car reached the turn-off for Devizes, where Poirot had arranged to take a secondary line into London later that morning. But before they reached the station, he tapped lightly on the glass. "Please," he said to the driver, "stop at the next post office." The driver, accustomed to odd requests from odd men, said nothing and complied. Inside, Poirot requested the most recent editions of the Times, the Daily Telegraph, and, more significantly, the Wiltshire Advertiser. He took them without ceremony and carried them to a quiet corner bench, spreading them before him with the solemnity of a chess player setting the board for endgame. He wasn't looking for headlines. Murders, after all, were rarely reported in the same voice they were committed, but rather for something smaller, quieter. It didn't take long. Beneath a column on page 7 of the Advertiser, wedged between a report on declining sheep exports and a notice about a charity bake sale, was a brief announcement: Felix Vale exhibition postponed. The anticipated debut showing of new portrait works by London-based artist Felix Vale, scheduled to open at the gallery on Wyndham Street, has been postponed indefinitely due to the artist's unforeseen withdrawal. No public statement has been issued. The gallery confirmed that several scheduled commissions have been cancelled, and a representative described the matter as sensitive. Poirot folded the paper neatly. It was not what the piece said, but what it avoided saying that intrigued him. The gallery had known Vale's identity, or suspected, and yet they had protected him, perhaps even encouraged the false name. Artistic circles were always tolerant of reinvention, so long as it sold. He boarded the train soon after, the countryside blurring past, but his thoughts remaining sharp. Back in London that afternoon, he did not return directly to Whitehaven Mansions. Instead, he walked, slowly, deliberately, through Mayfair, a part of the city where people wore their lineage like lapel pins and trusted discretion more than police. His destination was a narrow townhouse tucked between a dressmaker's showroom and a private antiquarian. A brass placard read, "Du Vallon and Finch, Solicitors and Estate Advisory." He had visited them once, years ago, over the matter of a contested Parisian inheritance. They had remembered him then, and they remembered him now. "Mr. Du Vallon is not in," said the clerk, a young woman with a precise French accent, "but I can assist you." "I believe you can," said Poirot, setting down a folded slip of paper with Felix Vale's forged name on one side and Jasper Marston's legal one on the other. "I wish to know who processed this identity. I do not seek scandal, only clarity." The woman hesitated, but her hands moved with practiced discretion. She left briefly, returned with a file, and opened it just enough for Poirot to see the signature at the bottom of the original artist alias registration, Ione Temple. It was not in her handwriting. That much Poirot could see at once, but it had been submitted under her name, her family address, and included a typed note of reference from Sir Alaric Marston, dated 2 years prior. The seal was real, but the signature, lightly forged. Expertly done. Someone had used Ione's name and Sir Alaric's letterhead to build the legal scaffolding around Felix Vale's identity. Poirot thanked the clerk, took no copies, and left the office with the same unhurried pace. Outside, the light had shifted again, and the shadows of the buildings fell in long diagonal lines across the cobbled path. He stood a moment beneath the awning and looked east, toward the gallery district. It would be closed by now, but its windows would still hold ghosts. He continued walking, not to the gallery, but to the address Ione had given on her original reference, her London residence, a flat near Knightsbridge, inherited through her mother's line. It was the kind of place one didn't need to live in, merely keep. A location for occasional letters, a nameplate to imply respectability. It was unoccupied. The caretaker confirmed she had not been seen there in over a year. Poirot did not frown. He had expected this. Instead, he returned at last to Whitehaven Mansions and sat at his writing table, where he began composing a single letter, handwritten, deliberate, without haste. "Mademoiselle Temple, you said you wanted her to understand, that you wanted her to feel what it was like to be reduced, to be reshaped by silence. In that, perhaps, you succeeded. But you are mistaken in thinking it has ended. You see, the house is not yours now, nor the story. You will find, I think, that inheritance is not always about what is given, but what is carried. Jasper Marston will stand trial, but you will carry the mirror, and it will reflect you, exactly as you were. Hercule Poirot." He signed it, sealed it, and addressed it to the London flat. He did not expect her to receive it, but letters, he believed, had strange ways of reaching their subjects. The days that followed were quiet. The newspapers ran only the smallest notice when Jasper's real name was confirmed. There was no scandal, no public confession. He pled not guilty. Poirot did not attend the proceedings, but weeks later, as summer drew into itself, and the light in his apartment took on the amber hue of late August, a parcel arrived. No return address, only a slim box wrapped in grey paper. Inside was a mirror, oval, small, framed in gilt, cracked cleanly down the middle. Poirot looked into it. His reflection came back to him in two halves, and for the first time since leaving Marston House, he smiled, because she had received the letter after all, and more importantly, she had understood. The cracked mirror sat on Poirot's writing desk for 3 days. He did not move it. He did not mention it to Miss Lemon, who eyed it once with polite curiosity before returning to her files. He did not explain it to Hastings, who stopped by briefly to share lunch and, seeing the broken glass, looked concerned, but said nothing. Poirot simply allowed it to remain, a final note in a composition that had already reached its last chord. And yet he studied it in the quiet hours, not for the image it reflected, but for what it suggested. The sender had chosen not to write, not to confess, but to echo. It was not remorse. It was acknowledgement. By the fourth morning, Poirot had decided to store it in his small cabinet of unfinished cases, not those unsolved, but those with edges still rough, with truths half buried in civility. But before he could place it away, another letter arrived. This one bore no pretense of anonymity. It came on creamstock, embossed with a faded crest Poirot recognized at once. Sir Alaric Marston had written. His handwriting was thin but practiced, its lines even, as though he had rewritten it more than once before sending. Monsieur Poirot, your departure was felt immediately, not by noise but by silence. Marston House has not returned to itself, nor do I expect it will. I write not to summon you back, nor to argue conclusions. I agree with your judgment more than you perhaps realize. What I wish to share is this. Ione left 2 days ago. No forwarding address, no final word. She took nothing but a single valise. Marjorie tells me she stood in the eastern drawing room for almost an hour before she left. Not speaking, not crying, just standing. I suspect she was saying goodbye, or trying to. I do not know what will become of her, and I wonder if that uncertainty is the only form of justice that fits. As for myself, I intend to live here, alone, but not idle. There is much work to do, on the house, yes, but also on memory, on what I failed to see. My wife did not deserve the ending she received. But I must believe the truth, fractured as it was, has at least spared us the comfort of illusion. You are welcome at Marston House, should you ever wish to return. The mirrors remain, but they reflect more carefully now. Yours sincerely, Alaric Marston. Poirot read the letter twice, before placing it neatly beside the mirror. He tapped the envelope lightly once, as if sealing a thought inside, then turned to the window, where morning light spilled across the floor in long slats. The city was beginning to hum. A milkman passed below. A dog barked once. A bus sputtered at the corner. Life, as ever, resumed. He had no intention of returning to Marston House. Not yet. Some places, like some truths, needed time to settle, and Poirot was not one to prod at a healing wound. Still, the matter was not entirely closed. That afternoon, he visited the offices of Scotland Yard. It was not a formal meeting. No files were requested, no statements reviewed. Poirot merely sought a quiet conversation with Inspector Green, who greeted him with a weary smile and a fresh cup of tea. "Ah," Green said, settling across from him. "I wondered if you'd stop by. Marston still circling your thoughts?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Not circling, hovering, perhaps, like the last note of a piano chord before the pedal lifts." Green chuckled. "You always did have a poetic streak." "Non, mon ami. I have order. The poetry comes when the order has gaps, Poirot sipped, and I find, in this case, a few minor notes remain unfiled. Green leaned forward. Go on, then. I'm listening. Poirot laid out the essentials with clarity. The forged artist alias, the submission of the false documents under Ione Temple's name, the typed letter from Sir Alaric, which bore all the external signs of authenticity, but had been fabricated by someone inside the household. These details were known, but Green had not pursued them, perhaps out of practicality, perhaps because Jasper Marston's arrest had seemed resolution enough. But Poirot was not quite finished. There was another moment, he said quietly, that lingers. The night of the death? No, Poirot said. The night after, when I returned to the drawing-room. The fire had died, yes, but the coals were not cold. Someone had tended them. Green frowned. You're saying someone stayed there? Watching? Not watching, waiting, for what I do not know, but the act of maintaining the fire, it is not instinctive, not unless one means to remain. Green leaned back. Alaric? Perhaps, or Marjorie, or even Ione, but none admitted it. And what does it mean? Poirot considered. It means someone expected something more, a reaction, a reckoning, that the plan, even after Portia's death, had not run its course, and so they remained, not to mourn, but to witness. Green exhaled slowly. And now? Now they have left, Poirot said. Or so we think. Green tilted his head. You think she'll come back? Poirot did not answer at once. He turned the teacup once in his fingers, then met Green's eyes. No, he said. She won't return to Marston House, but she will return to herself. That, I think, is the more dangerous place. They spoke no further of it. There was no charge to be made, no legal case to pursue, and Poirot, precise as ever, knew the law had its limits. The greater part of this mystery, its resentment, its silence, its careful manipulation, lived outside the reach of handcuffs. But as he stepped out once more into the late summer street, he paused to look back at the yard's entrance. For a moment, the brass of the doorway reflected his figure, not distorted, not broken, but clear, whole. He nodded once to himself. That evening, at Whitehaven Mansions, he took the mirror from his desk, wrapped it in linen, and placed it in the lowest drawer of his cabinet. Not buried, but stored. It had served its purpose. And in the drawer beside it, he placed Alaric's letter. He left a single space empty next to both, just in case the story had one more reflection left to cast. It was a quiet Wednesday afternoon, when the final echo came, not from Wiltshire, nor from any court of law, but from a seemingly mundane source. A modest envelope, hand-delivered, bearing no return address, and sealed with a dull red wax that cracked easily beneath Poirot's thumb. Miss Lemon had placed it atop the Morning Post, with a slight frown, having noted that it arrived not through the regular postman, but by courier, a young woman in grey gloves who had declined to give a name. Poirot, as was his custom, opened it with care. Inside was a single sheet, no signature, no salutation, but the handwriting was familiar now, as distinct as the scent that clung faintly to the page. Jasmine again, though softer now, less deliberate. The portrait is finished. It does not hang in any gallery. It will not be shown. But it exists. It is the only honest one, and it is hers. There was no need for a name. The message did not ask for response. It merely announced something, like a whisper across a distance no longer bridgeable. Poirot folded the letter and placed it beside the others. Lady Portia's diary, Alaric's note, and the mirror. The final tile, perhaps, in a mosaic built of silence. But silence, he knew, could still be broken by the unexpected. Later that day, Inspector Green arrived unannounced. He wore an expression that carried more than duty, a subtle furrow between his brows, a tightness in his shoulders that Poirot recognized not as stress, but something closer to discomfort. "I wasn't planning to bother you," Green said, accepting the chair Poirot offered. "But something's turned up, and frankly I thought you ought to see it before the papers get hold of it." He handed over a slim brown folder. Inside were two photographs, one grainy, the other sharper, both taken from a distance. "The second was taken 3 days ago," Green said, "in Paris." Poirot looked carefully. The subject was unmistakable, even though the coat was plain and the hair darker than before. Ione Temple, standing outside a small chapel on the left bank. Not alone. "She met with a woman who identified herself as a gallery liaison," Green continued. "But she wasn't there for art. According to the embassy staff, she made inquiries about transferring ownership of a small property outside Lyon, something that's apparently been in the family through her mother's side." Poirot's brow lifted just slightly. "She intends to vanish properly this time," he said. Green nodded. "Looks that way. New name, new history, quiet money. But there's more." He pulled a second folder from his coat and opened it to reveal a small, carefully preserved legal document, a handwritten amendment to a will, dated 5 years prior, and stamped by the Marston family solicitor. "Lady Portia's last codicil," Green said, "only recently discovered. It was filed but never acted on. She added one clause, that a personal portrait be retained by the family and never sold or exhibited. She even referenced a specific future work, should one exist, by name." Poirot took the page gently. "To retain any final image that captures my likeness, not in favor, but in truth, as a record of what becomes of silence and time." There was a single initial beneath it, P, and a faint notation in the margin. "Veil." Poirot closed the file. "She knew," he said. "Even then, she didn't fear the portrait because it revealed her. She feared what it would reveal to those who saw her differently." Green sat back. "So what do we do?" Poirot looked at him not unkindly. "Nothing." Green blinked. "Nothing? She has left. The painting exists, but it will not be shown, and the man who painted it is in custody under a name that will not be restored. Ione Temple has no legal claim to anything more. The house remains. The inheritance will pass quietly to the next rightful name, and the papers will forget within the week." Poirot stood, walked slowly to the sideboard, and poured a small measure of cassis into a crystal glass. "There are crimes that demand correction," he said, "and there are crimes that demand understanding. This was an arrangement of pain, layered and inherited. No murder in the legal sense, but a death caused nonetheless. And what justice is there for that, mon ami?" Green didn't answer at first. Then, with a low sigh, he rose. "You think she'll stay gone?" Poirot nodded. "Yes. She does not wish to be followed, and there is nothing left for her to return to." Green lingered a moment longer, then took his leave without ceremony. Alone again, Poirot returned to his desk. He opened the drawer and laid the new letter beside the mirror. His collection of unresolved truths had grown by one more whisper. That evening, the clouds cleared above the city. The sky turned the color of deep metal before surrendering to dusk. Poirot stepped out onto the balcony for the first time in weeks, his coat folded over one arm. He looked out across the rooftops, the chimneys, the rows of orderly lives. Some lived in shadows by choice, others by design, and a few, like Lady Portia, had tried to live in reflection, unmoving, precise, untouched. But reflections, he had learned, were always incomplete. In the quiet, a knock came at the door. He did not call for Miss Lemon. Instead, he answered it himself. It was a courier. No uniform, no badge. Just a young man in a grey cap who handed over a small wooden crate, carefully wrapped and sealed. Poirot recognized the sender address at once, Marston House. Inside was a frame, no glass, no mirror, a painting. He opened it slowly, drawing away the cloth, and stared. It was not a likeness of Lady Portia as she had appeared in life. Not the composed elegance, not the arched brows and sculpted cheekbones. This was something different. The face in the portrait was older, unfinished in some places, too detailed in others. The eyes were not cruel, not even stern. They were afraid, not of death, but of erasure. And behind her, just barely visible, a reflection in the painted glass. One that did not match her gaze. Ione had sent it after all. Not to honor Portia, not to provoke Poirot, but to end the echo. He stood there for a long time, studying it. Then gently, he placed the painting beside the cracked mirror. Two truths, in conflict, in harmony. He turned out the light, leaving the room in twilight, and the two faces, one of canvas, one of glass, looked quietly back. The painting remained in the study for several days, unframed, propped against the wall beneath the window, where the late summer light touched it only in the early mornings. Poirot did not move it. He allowed it to become part of the room, like the cracked mirror now mounted discreetly on the opposite wall. They faced one another, two renderings of truth, one painted, one fractured, locked in silent dialogue. He had not heard again from Ione Temple. He did not expect to. Her silence now was not a retreat, but a choice. Perhaps the first she had made entirely on her own, free of inheritance, free of the gaze she had so long tried to redirect. Wherever she was, Poirot believed she was not idle. People like her rarely were. They shaped themselves the way others shaped clay or light, constantly refining, withholding, revealing only what served the version of themselves they wished to preserve. Jasper Marston, Felix Vale, had not contested his identity further. The trial proceeded without spectacle. The press had tried to stir drama, but there were no outbursts, no dramatic unmaskings, only the quiet processing of a man whose crime had been committed in silence and shadow, whose punishment now was the erasure he had once tried to avenge. Poirot did not attend the sentencing. He did not need to. He had seen enough truth. Justice, in this case, had not come by force, but by consequence, revealed slowly, like breath on cold glass. And perhaps that was the only kind of justice possible for a crime so deliberately constructed to hide behind reflections. One morning, as the season began to shift, he took the portrait down. With care, he wrapped it and had it delivered back to Marston House with a note in his own hand. She was not what you feared she was, nor what you hoped she would become. She was only what she could endure to be. Let her rest. Alaric sent no reply. But 3 weeks later, Poirot received word from Marjorie Pym. The portrait had been hung in the eastern drawing-room where the mirror once stood. The glass had not been replaced. In its absence, Lady Portia now looked out not at herself, but at those who came into the room. Poirot thought that fitting. On the final evening, he stood once more on his balcony, as the sky folded itself into the first blush of autumn. The rooftops glowed, and the city exhaled. He leaned against the rail, hands folded neatly. So much of this affair had been rooted not in the act of murder, but in the manipulation of perception, the weaponizing of silence, the calculated abuse of memory. It was not the crime that lingered in his mind, but the intent behind it. The desire not merely to harm, but to rewrite, to alter how someone would be remembered. That, in the end, was the motive. Not greed, not jealousy, but authorship. And yet, no one controls a legacy completely. Poirot understood that better than most. He had seen great men undone by whispers, small men immortalized by coincidence. But this case, the affair at Mirrors at Marston House, had reminded him of something even deeper. That truth, like a reflection, is never whole. It bends with light, with context, with fear. But the little grey cells, they straighten it. They return it to order. And even in the face of a carefully polished lie, they reveal what must be seen. Inside, the room behind him was still. The mirror in its drawer, the letters filed away, the painting returned. The case was closed. And so, with one last glance at the city below, Hercule Poirot turned and went in, shutting the door behind him with quiet precision. The detective had done what he always did. He had seen, he had understood, and he had made the truth impossible to ignore.